Hi everyone, welcome back to Revive TV. This week we're continuing our series on the 5 requirements of optimal health and well-being. And this week we've got the last 2 requirements, and these 2, in my opinion, are the 2 most neglected. Okay, before we start our second episode of the 5 requirements and share the last 2 requirements to being optimally healthy and well, I want to touch on the way our society views health and how we talked about measurements last week, but also how when we're setting goals or you want to learn about health, the best way to study it. If you were to study anything that you wanted to master, whether that might be the job that you're doing, whether it's financial success you're after, relationships, health, whatever it is that you wanted to master and get better at, and you were studying it, who would you study and what would you study? For example, if we were talking about, say, financial success, perhaps we would study someone like Sir Richard Branson, who's a great entrepreneur and been very successful in that field, perhaps, or Warren Buffett or something like that. If you wanted to study to be a great tennis player, you'd probably look at someone like Roger Federer or Rafael Nadal or Serena Williams and study what they did and learn from them what the requirements are to be successful in whatever endeavour you had. What you wouldn't do, for example, if you were studying to be a tennis player, you wouldn't come and ask me what is required to be an awesome tennis player. Why? Because, believe it or not, I'm not an awesome tennis player. So you would always go and study someone who has done it successfully, whether that's financially, through work, through sports, through relationships, whatever it is. If you were studying it, you would either study someone that was successful, you'd have mentors who perhaps were successful, or go to courses where they can teach you that information. One of the reasons I brought up this is because one of the interesting things what we do around health in our Western culture is we kind of start to do that in reverse. We kind of flip that idea of studying what's great and study what's not great, and make that our basis of our health. For example, when we talk about whether we're well or not in a Western culture, it's either we have a symptom, so we're sick or we're bad, or we don't have a symptom, so we're healthy. Last week we talked about the difference between function and feeling. Go back and visit that episode if you want to dive into that. There'll be a little link in the text. So what I've discovered that in our Western culture in particularly, when we study health, we tend to study it from the point of view of someone being sick and then getting them out of sickness. So someone has a symptom and we say, oh, they're not well. How do we get rid of that symptom? And so we might say, okay, we need to have a treatment, a therapy. We might need to take some medication to get rid of that problem. And we're looking to kind of either kill it or stop it from occurring. And once that symptom is gone, we say, okay, it's gone. We must be healthy. But as we said last week, if you just because you don't have a feeling doesn't mean you are functioning well. And we're talking about optimal health and well-being here. So we study pathology, or we study the symptom, and then we try and go from that point of view. Yet if we look at any other field that we want to have excellence in or we want to master, we'll go and study people who are it already. We don't study people who are, let's say, we're talking about tennis players. We don't go and study someone who's just learning how to play tennis. We'd go and study Roger Federer. So the same with health. We want to study someone who is already sick. We want to go and study someone who's healthy and base our premise from there. So and that's where I say the premise of the way we study for health is a little bit flipped compared to every other facet of life. So let's not worry about the illness so much now, but let's work about what actually health is and how people do it. So we've already given you the first 3 requirements, and one is that we need to have the proper fuel, the proper nutrition, and we discussed that last week. We also have proper movement, and there was 4 requirements of movement inside that requirement itself. And then the third one was we need adequate rest, sleep. These are 3 requirements. Nothing new that you haven't heard before. Perhaps have heard them a little differently, and realizing now that you probably could get better in some of those areas. The next 2, however, are things that I think are neglected. The first one I'm going to share, I think we're moving well into this space where we're dealing with it better. But the second one is having really good headspace. So when I talk about headspace, it's how we feel about ourselves, how we view the world. We want to have a generally a positive or an attitude of thankfulness or gratitude for what we have. So some of the key requirements of thinking well or having a good headspace is having a purpose, having a reason for getting up each day. Whether it's family, whether it's work, whether it's a loved one, whether it's a business that we have. Having something that we want to achieve is definitely a requirement within the headspace requirement itself. We want to have a healthy self-esteem. So we actually did a blog on this quite a while ago on the importance of self-esteem and productivity, and producing stuff, having a purpose, staying on point and accomplishing, having integrity. Some of the requirements of having a healthy self-esteem. So the way we view ourselves and the way we view the world can have a great impact on our health. You think about when you perhaps having some financial stress or work stress, the type of anxiety and perhaps other things that come with that, whether it's depression, you have around that scenario. Flip that, when you say perhaps on a holiday or in a loving relationship or you've achieved something really well, what's the positive feelings that you get? We have a release of really healthy hormones in this state. So having a good headspace is really important to our overall health because the hormones that we release when we are in that zone. So the fourth requirement is making sure that we have good headspace, or you could just say simply thinking well. And the fifth and the last one is probably, in my opinion, the most neglected, and it's one very close to my heart because it's around the nervous system. And as a chiropractor who deals with correcting people's spines and making sure their posture is great, and in turn knowing that when we get good posture, we're going to have a healthy functioning nervous system, this is pretty close to my heart. So I just want to stop here for a moment and think about this requirement. I'm talking about making sure that you have proper brain-body connection. What's the significance? Well, what does the brain control? As we've said many times in this series, that the brain controls every function of our body. And the brain, via the spinal cord and the peripheral nerves that exit out of the spine, allow us to communicate to all our organs, our glands, our systems, and to our muscles, our tendons, and our ligaments to give feedback to the brain so it knows what to do next. Now, if we have interference to that nervous system, if there's an interruption to the message from the brain to the body and back again, over time left interrupted, we're going to have some negative feedback loops, which means that the responses coming out could affect our health in the long run. So the fifth and final requirement, which I believe is the most neglected, is to make sure that you have a healthy functioning spine and nervous system. Now, the best way I know to do that is if you visit a corrective care chiropractor. That's what we do in our practice, where we make sure that your posture is working well, make sure that the joints are moving well, and then in turn, we know that your nervous system is going to be functioning really well. There are other people who work in neurology and have other great tools, but I know in my experience, this has been the best way to do this, is to have this healthy functioning nervous system, is to have it checked and make sure that the spine and nervous system are well aligned. In our office, we'll measure function, so we'll get some baselines on some function underneath, so we can actually just not measure your pain or your signals, but we also measure how you're functioning as well. So there you have it. There's the 5 requirements to optimal health and well-being. The first one is nutrition. And we talked about making sure we have good fats, good protein, plenty of fruit and veg, good nuts, and a smattering of fruit is what our bodies require. We talked about physical movement. We talked about the fact that we need to sprint a little, move fast. We need to lift a little, lift heavy. We need to move a lot, walking and leaving the car at home where we can. And we need to be mobile, stretching, yoga, that type of thing. The third one was sleep and rest, allowing our organs and our systems to just shut down and work their way through it and recalibrate. Really important, somewhere between 6 to 8 hours. The fourth one is our headspace, thinking well, and we need to have a purpose. We need to have actions that can to see out that purpose, and we need to have a healthy self-esteem, so making sure we feel pretty good about ourselves. One of the best ways of doing that is to do meditation, or even write down some at the end of each day. 3 things that you're grateful for. And the fifth, and not necessarily the most important, but I think most neglected, no doubt, is making sure that you have a healthy brain and nervous system and a healthy spine as well. The best way I know to do that is to get checked by your local corrective care chiropractor and see how yours is functioning. I want to thank you for watching these 2 episodes. I hope they've been super helpful, and I look forward to seeing you for the next episode of Revive TV.